My name is James Whitaker. I work for Microsoft in Seattle, and I'm here to teach all these young entrepreneurs some things about presenting their ideas. An idea is just an idea until you convince someone else it's a good idea. If you have a good idea, it's a shame to let it die on the vine. And so having a good idea is part of it, and that's what they're working on. But convincing others that it's a good idea so that they'll invest in it, they'll be interested in the product, is a crucial skill. If you look at all the real leaders that we respect on this planet, John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Winston Churchill, they're all storytellers. And being able to deliver a powerful story makes your idea come alive. There's a lot of voices on the web. And so you can't necessarily be a louder voice unless you've got a big advertising budget. So you need to be a better voice. Storytelling has never been more important than it is now. So much of it is just related to being unprepared. They get up, they understand their idea, they haven't thought about the story. So they get up, they don't know what their first opening line is, and I think that's crucial to have a very good opening line and recite it perfectly. They screw it up in the first couple of minutes. And, brain science shows us you only have a minute or so, 2 minutes max, that people are going to pay attention before they tune out. And you can't waste that. Spoken word, right, or video is much more powerful because it's so much more visual. You hear, you see, you can choreograph, not only the pitch and tone of your voice, but the movements that you have on stage. It's much more powerful than any other medium. Dream big, try to change the world, and do it with stories.
Okay, now let me introduce our keynote speaker, Mr. Dower. He is a software engineer for Python, and he actually is he is responsible for the Python tool of Visual Studio at Microsoft. So let us give our applause and the time to Steve.
Who's been to a boring presentation? Wait, let me rephrase. Who went to school? Yeah? When you were at school, did you go to a boring class? Did you have a teacher standing up there telling you all of this stuff, and you're just falling asleep, head on the table, or you're walking out, or you're just sitting there going, why are you giving me all of this information I don't understand? Why do I care? Do you ever pick up a newspaper or go to a blog and read it and go, what are you telling me? You're not giving me anything. You're not teaching me anything. I'm not learning anything. You have empty words. So you've taken all this time to write something down, and you haven't told me anything. Or maybe you picked up some new fancy device. You've got your new laptop, your new iPhone, whatever it is, and you actually go and read the instruction manual, and it turns out to not have good instructions in it. Ever done that? These are all cases of bad communication. They're bad communication because the person doing it was not intentional about it. We all have great tools for communicating. And we need to use those effectively. We need to use those intentionally for our ideas to be good ideas when they're accepted by other people. The tools that you have, you can speak. Everyone here can speak. And I don't necessarily mean standing at the front of the room like I am, speaking to everyone. You can talk to the person next to you. Not right now. Afterwards. You can talk to your friends. You can talk to your family. You can probably give presentations. You can make videos. You can go on podcasts. You can talk. That's one of your communication tools. I'm fairly sure you can all write. We've been speaking for thousands and thousands of years. We haven't been writing for thousands of years, at least not generally. But these days, anyone can write a blog. Anyone can write an article. You can write documentation. You can write email. This is writing. And when you know how to write properly, when you're intentional about what you're writing, you'll have far more effective communications. And you can instruct. Instructing is different from writing. Instructing is a lot more step-by-step. Do this, this will happen, do this. Sounds awfully like code, right? If you write code, when you write code, you're instructing the computer. If you write a recipe, food recipe, this is a great example. Take 2 eggs, take bacon, you have breakfast. That's instructions. Walkthroughs, if you've ever written a walkthrough for some piece of software or filed a bug report, do this, do this, do this, it breaks. That's instructing. When you use instructing well, you can communicate really effectively. If you misuse instructing, you're going to confuse people, you're going to make them think that you just wasted their time. It's going to be like the instructions for building the table did not help because you weren't intentional about communicating your instructions. But why should you listen to me about this? I work at Microsoft. I'm an engineer there. I write a lot of code. That's instructing. I write a lot of documentation. I do quite a few blogs. You can check some of them out. I get posted on my own blog. I did a PhD. There's a big thesis if you are really, really wanting to get to sleep. And a number of blogs on various Microsoft blogs. And I also speak a lot. I do all of these things. For years, I've been thinking through, I've been very intentional. What do I speak about? What do I do while I'm speaking to keep you engaged, to keep you interested? When I write, what am I trying to achieve? How do I have the most effective writing? And how do I make sure that I'm not writing big written words, a novel, when I should be writing instructions, or when I should be standing in front of an awesome audience and speaking to you? These are all things that I've worked on for years, and today I'm sharing with you the questions that I go through when I'm planning any sort of communication. I could spend a long time teaching you how to be a better speaker. I'm not going to do that today. I could spend a decent amount of time teaching you to be a better writer. I'm not going to do that today. I could help you give better instructions so that people will understand what you want them to do better, but I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to give you today is the tools, the questions, the ideas, the areas to investigate so that you can decide which one of these you should be doing, how you should be doing it, and be intentional when you communicate so you can have the biggest impact, so your ideas can spread to those around you and become great ideas that everyone loves. Ready? This is kind of the outline. There are 3 big questions that you've got to ask before you do any sort of communication. This is how you be intentional. These are the 3 questions that I work from every single time. Who is your audience? Who are they? I mean, I can see you now, but I've been thinking about you guys for months, trying to figure out who you are. What's my intent? What am I going to achieve? I'm here now. I'm trying to achieve something. You'll find out as we go along. But I've been thinking about that for a long time. What's my intent? And which tool am I going to use? How will I achieve my intent? Obviously, I'm using speaking. In this case, I knew I was speaking, so that changed my intent. If I was going to be writing you a letter, I'd be intending to achieve something different. I'll get into this, but these are the 3 high-level questions. Who is your audience? What is your intent? How will you achieve that intent? Audiences are hard. Just gonna say that. When you have one person to talk to, when you go into a meeting, it can be easy. You know who it is. You'll know all the answers to these questions. When you have a huge crowd like this, it's hard. And if you have a crowd of American teenage kids and you happen to be a British comedian, you're in a bit of trouble. So, first part of this question. What does your audience already have? You all came into the room. You weren't completely fresh, brand new people with no past experience, with no past ideas. You come in and you have a background. You have a history. If you try and communicate, if you were up here trying to communicate with you as an audience, and you don't know what the past experiences are, what the knowledge of the group is, what assumptions they're making. How are you going to effectively communicate? How do you know? You'll spend half an hour introducing topics that your audience already knows. Or you'll skip it. If you don't know what your audience knows, if you don't know what they don't know, how do you know what to tell them? How do you know what they need to hear? And the more fun side of this, what are their emotions? Who doesn't have an emotion right now? One guy up the back. Oh no, that's Amber. Amber has no emotions because she's finished her talk. Everyone has an emotion. Some of you are tired, some of you are angry, some of you are probably hungry, even though we just had lunch. It was really good, by the way. You have to know that for your audience. If you walk into a room full of angry people, you need to treat that differently. You need to be aware of that because it's very different from walking into a room of people who are really excited to see you. Anyone have a pet dog? No? No one? Do pet dogs not exist in Taiwan? You guys are missing out. Pet dogs are the best. Because you walk home and they're always happy to see you. They're always happy to see you. That's a great audience to have. When you walk in and everyone's so happy to see you, they're running up, jumping, clapping, cheering, it's so good. But that's a different audience from a cat who just looks at you and says, "Why haven't you fed me all day? I've been here waiting." Need to know your audience's emotions. Flaws. Who's perfect? Amber again. There's something wrong with everyone. We're all human. You need to know what that is. You need to be prepared to either avoid it, be gentle with it, be aware of it, be prepared for the flaws, for the faults that we have to come back at you. The fault you can assume for a big audience, especially at a tech conference, is that everyone has a laptop with something that's so important that even though it's a Sunday, they have to read their email rather than listen to you. That's the biggest flaw you'll find in a tech crowd. And then fears. No matter what you're communicating, you need to know what your audience is afraid of. If you're trying to relieve that fear, you need to know what it is. If you're trying to stoke that fear, you're trying to be elected president of the United States. But you need to know what people are afraid of. Are they afraid of losing? Are they afraid of having something taken? Are they afraid of hearing something they're not going to like? Doesn't mean you have to avoid it. Doesn't mean you have to ignore it. But you do need to be aware of it. Otherwise, you cannot be intentional with your audience. What do they need? What do you guys need? What do you want from me? Everyone needs something. Maybe it's information. Someone's going to give you something that they've written out so you can have information. Is that what you need? Do you need motivation? Do you need someone to stand up here and go, yeah, 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 until you're really excited and you go off and you run out and you start coding and start contributing and 1,000 pull requests go into the open source community today? Is that what you need? Do you need direction? You want to do that, you're just not sure how. You need the instructions on how to do that. Do you need affirmation? Do you really want someone to stand up here and say, you guys are doing a great job? Really well done. Sometimes that's what you have to communicate. But the one thing everyone always, always, always needs is stories, no matter how you're communicating. When you are in any way speaking, writing to people, we need stories. Stories are how we've communicated since we came into existence. Spoken, written, recorded. We dance stories. We turn stories into music. Every single form of communication we have is about sharing stories with each other. Your audience needs a story. And what do they need to change? This is going to directly influence your intent when you get up to speak. It's directly going to influence your intent when you start writing something. If your audience doesn't need anything to change at all, don't try and change them. Don't communicate with them. Maybe you need to change their mind. Maybe one day you're going to walk into a room of people who think Ruby is the best programming language, and your job is to change their mind. How are you going to do that? Do you know that that's what you have to do? Maybe you have to change their ideas. Maybe someone has an idea that they don't think is great, and you need to make it sound great. Maybe you need to give out ideas. Maybe you need to receive ideas. Are you going to change their plans? Everyone's planning to walk out halfway through this talk. And so I have to change your plan so that you walk out after this talk. So far, it looks pretty good, but we're not halfway yet. Maybe you need to change prejudices. Everyone in the room believes something that you disagree with. We're all people. You can find something that you disagree with another person about. Doesn't mean that they're wrong or you're wrong, necessarily. But one of your things that your audience may need is to change their prejudices. You need to expose them to some new information, some new experiences, to change what they believe, to change what they act on, to change what they're afraid of. Or you want to change their ambition. Who's ambitious? Who's ambitious? And the ambitious hands went, ugh, and nobody kind of went, Let's try that again. Who's ambitious? Ah, better, much better. That's the motivation one on the previous slide. So when preparing for an audience, who are they? What do they have? What do they need? What do you need to change? And when you've thought that through, we start figuring out what is your intent. Because your intent is going to influence what you do. If you work at a big company, you always have the choice of sending an email to lots of people or calling a meeting with lots of people. How do you decide? It depends on your intent. If your intent is to give out a whole lot of information, you need an email. If your intent is to persuade people of something, you need to speak to them. You need a meeting. And I break it down into these three categories. Is your intent that your audience will believe something new? You came in here thinking you knew everything you needed to know to get through the day, and my intent is to make you believe something new. Maybe you came in believing that an email and a speech are basically the same thing, and if you prepare them the same way, you'll get the same results, and I'm going to change your belief. I want you to believe something new. I want you to believe that if you need to change someone's belief, you need to speak to them. You need to be in front of them, look them in the eyes, let them know that you're paying attention to them, and give them a reason to believe something new. Give them a story that causes them to believe something new. If you just want someone to know something new, this is a different intent. Making you believe something new is a conversation. It's hard to have a conversation with a big crowd, but I'm having it. I can see your eyes, I can see people looking at me, I can see who's nodding, who's shaking their heads, who's reading email. It's a conversation, but when you just need to give someone something new, make them know something new, you can write it for them. You don't necessarily need to be part of a conversation there. And this gets back to the boring school, because school is all about getting you to know something new. But we treat it as if you need to believe something new, and so you get speaking. You get a teacher stands up front and tells you the things that you need to know. What if they came written down? There's been enough brain science study done to know that you don't retain that much information. After you walk out of this talk, you won't be able to replay this entire talk in your head. That's just how we are. We don't absorb that much information. But if it's written down, firstly, you can keep it. You can go back and look at it whenever you like. But most people are also going to absorb written material differently from spoken material. Every time I speak, I'm changing the way you feel. I'm giving you a new emotion. I'm deliberately going faster and slower at different times as I speak to change the way you feel. Sometimes you're with me as I speak, slowly stopping, pausing. And when I get faster and start rolling along and a little bit louder, you start getting excited. But you can't do that in written word. But you don't need to, because that doesn't help people absorb new information. It doesn't help them know something new. It helps them believe something new. Or maybe you want them to do something new. You all do things. If I want to change the things that you do, then I need to give you instructions. I can't speak really excitedly to get you to do something new unless it's the result of believing something new. I can't get you to do something different as a result of knowing something. Well, I can't get you to do something new through writing unless it's as a result of believing something new. But through instructions. And this is actually simpler than you may be thinking. You've seen that sign that says employees must wash hands? That's an instruction that makes you do something new. It's that simple. But if your intent is to make someone do something new, you're probably looking at something that simple. It's not going to be a long talk. It's not going to be a long presentation. It's going to be a simple instruction. Different intents are going to lead to different ways of communicating. And so the tools that we have available, back where I started. You can speak. Speaking is how you inspire, it's how you persuade. If your intent is to change people's belief, you do that through speech. Either one-on-one, one to a big group, one to a huge group. Some of the best speakers in the world that we've ever seen, Martin Luther King, John F. Kennedy, spoke to huge crowds and inspired huge crowds. So many people that we've never met and never heard of have inspired one-on-one. Someone has inspired you. Someone spoke to you and inspired you. You also use speaking for surprise. It's hard to surprise someone when it's written down. The best authors can do it. That's why they're the best. Us amateur authors can't do it. We can't surprise you when it's written down. We need to surprise you when we speak. Who tells jokes? People tell jokes to each other. Do you write the joke down and give it to the other person? No, that doesn't work. It spoils the punchline. It spoils the timing. Surprise is a great way to reinforce a message that you can only do with speech. Here's an example from the conference. I saw this the other day. One of the presenters was talking about not creating an API that's going to break stuff. This is about as much Python as I'm bringing into this talk. But they had an API that was query some result from a data set and then assign that to a variable. And if that can't find the value, it was going to return none. There are two ways to explain what happens next. There's the written way, like documentation would say, like a tutorial might say, and there's the spoken way. And the thing I really like about how this speaker used the spoken way is she used surprise. So let me give you a double example. Here, the written way of this, when you return a variable that is null and assign it to a variable, and then you try and access an attribute on that variable, it will raise an attribute error. That's straight out of the documentation. That's straight out of the documentation. You can go and read that, and after reading that, you will know that if you get none back from a function, and try and read an attribute on that, it will raise an attribute error. Here's roughly how the speaker did it. It was in Mandarin, so I have to translate, and I can't translate, so I'm translating from emotion. Here's how the speaker did it. You call this function. I'll stop there. Notice how it's a story already? Notice how it's a story. You are calling this function. That's what you can do in speaking. It's a story. You call this function, and it can't find it, so it gives back none. And you access an attribute, boom! Attribute error. Surprise. Surprise. But you'll remember that. You won't remember the description I read out of the documentation. You will remember boom, and you might remember attribute error. But if it's that important, it needs to be written down. If you want someone to if you want to change what someone believes about returning none from a function, that's a great way to do it. If you want to teach someone what happens, it's not a great way to do it. And convince. You can't convince someone with written word. None of the best persuaders have ever written a sufficiently persuasive word to change people dramatically. Look at Winston Churchill, convinced an entire country to be brave, to support a war that none of them wanted. He didn't do it in writing. He did it in spoken word. The people that heard him were persuaded. The written versions of his speeches were given by people who'd already been persuaded, and those people persuaded the ones reading it that it was right. Persuasion only happens in speech. If you need to persuade an audience, if you need to persuade someone, you have to do it in speech. Writing is how you change what someone knows. If you've looked at your audience, found what they need, decided that you are going to teach them that thing, that you are going to provide that knowledge, you probably have to be looking at writing. And as I said, this is everything from documentation, blog posts, articles, Twitter. Twitter is not the best way to write, by the way. But it's not a better way to persuade. It's not speaking. If you're educating people, use writing. One page of written word is going to educate people so much more than a 1-hour presentation. If you sit through a lecture, you make notes. Then it's written down, and then you can learn from it. If you don't make notes, you'll walk out and remember one thing. If you make notes, you'll remember what's written down, because it's written down. If you're trying to inform someone, you don't need to persuade them. You don't need to change their mind. You just need to let them know that something is going to be late, that something has to be done differently, and there's no persuasion involved. It's simple information. Do that in writing. You don't need to call a meeting to tell people something that there's no persuasion, that there's no discussion. You can send an email that says, this is how it is. That's informing. And when you intentionally choose to inform people by email, it's much more effective than if you intentionally and poorly choose to get everyone together and talk at them. Teaching is all about informing. Teaching is all about informing. The one exception is teaching people how to speak. But even that should be written down. But it needs live examples. A lot of teaching does require live examples. A lot of teaching still benefits from speaking, but the bulk of the learning is going to be done from the written material. People who have ever lectured a class, what do students ask? Are there notes? Can I have the notes? They don't care that you're going to spend 24 hours talking to them. They want the written notes because that's how they're going to learn, because that is how we learn. That's how we retain information, having it written down. If you think you're going to teach people simply by speaking at them, you're not going to be an effective teacher. You're going to have students who either rely entirely on their notes or their classmates' notes. You're going to have colleagues who don't know what you think you've taught them. You're going to have audiences that don't actually learn anything. They come into your talk. You teach them a whole lot of stuff, and they walk out and they haven't learned anything. Because teaching is done by writing. Or describing. Describing can be done in the spoken word. Look at poetry. These days we mostly read poetry, but for a long time poetry was spoken to describe things, but with a different result. If someone has to retain that description and reproduce it later, that's a description best written down. If you want to describe, I'm not a poet, so bear with me. If you want to describe flowing fields and golden flowers and beautiful sunlight and rainbows or whatever, you can do that in speech. You'll make people feel nice or disgusted if you're not very good at it. But they won't remember the description. If they need to remember the description, it needs to be written down. Ever wondered why, when you're in court, they write everything down? Because it's important enough to be remembered. Because the descriptions that take place in a courtroom need to be written down. Some conferences do a great job of transcribing every speech. It's all written down. The things that people need to remember are written down. Arguably, they shouldn't be doing that because people shouldn't be presenting things that need to be written down. But it's where we're at. I would hope that after this, none of you will get up at the next PyCon Taiwan and present something that should have been written down. If that's what you were planning to do, here's your chance to change it. Present something that couldn't possibly be written down. Write the documentation. That needs to be written down, and then convince people they should go and read it. That's how you teach when you're speaking. And then instructing. Again, code is a way of instructing. It's a way of guiding, telling the computer what it should do. You can instruct well, you can instruct poorly. You can code well, you can code poorly. It works. But it also applies for people. Good instructions can be followed well. Bad instructions are followed poorly. And if you try and use instructions to teach, it's a disaster. If you try and use instructions to persuade, it's a disaster. If you try and use speech to instruct, there's only one effective way of that I'm aware of, which is in the military, when they shout at you. When they say, "Attention!" That's instruction that works by voice. That's about it. That's about it. If I'm speaking, I can't instruct you unless I convince you to follow an instruction. If I'm writing, I can't instruct you unless I give you the information you need to follow those instructions. And maybe those instructions are written down. Maybe they are spoken. But they're written in a different way. You don't write paragraphs worth of instructions. You don't write pages and pages of walls of text of instructions. Step 1, do this. Step 2, do this. Step 3, do this. Result. You use instructions to control. If you've decided that what your audience needs is to be controlled, that you have people going one way and other people going another way, you give them instructions. Everyone go this way. That's an instruction. Persuading them that they should go that way so they agree is a different task. But telling them, go this way, that's an instruction. And if your intent is to instruct, if your intent is to control, you're looking at instructing an audience. So here I go. This is where you get instructions. Next steps, because I don't want you to walk out of here and just forget it all, because this is far too important for you to simply glaze over and leave. This is about taking your ideas, putting them in someone else's head in a way that turns it into a great idea, that makes it spread, that makes people better as a whole. Communication is how we survive as a species. The more intentional you are, the better our existence as a whole is. So you need to do this. Next steps. Maybe it's first steps. Maybe you've not done anything like this before. Have you created anything? Have you done anything? The answer is yes. I don't even need to ask that question. Who ate breakfast this morning? Good. You've done something. That counts. Who came to a keynote today? That's not quite everyone who came to a keynote today. You did something. So tell someone. Speak. Use your voice. Doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't have to be a huge audience. Lightning talks are coming up. I think we've still got some slots left, so if you want to tell people, that's a great chance. Give them a story. Show them why you're excited about it. People love stories. Did you have a really, really, really good breakfast this morning? Tell people why. And don't list the ingredients. Tell the story. I woke up. I was on the wrong side of the bed again. A pillow had fallen out. Day was looking bad. Bad. My eyes were all glued together. Yeah. But last night was great. Whoa, what a night. So I put some bacon on. Put some bacon on. Everyone loves bacon, right? I normally present to American audiences. Everyone loves bacon there. And some eggs. I scrambled some eggs. Bit of salt, bit of cheese. Oh, dude, what a breakfast. What a breakfast. You can see why I'm excited about it. It's a story. I told you. You've done something. So tell someone. Write for someone. Explain what it is. I just said I had scrambled eggs. That's all I said. I didn't describe them. Simply by saying that doesn't mean you'll recognize scrambled eggs if you've never seen them before. You need a description. But you do that in writing. Write something. Maybe you've created a new library. You've made a project. Describe it. Go back to GitHub and fill in that README file. It's there for a reason. Describe what you've done. Help people understand what it is that you've done. Not just why you did it, that's the story. Help them understand what it is, what the pieces are, what they do, why it works together, how it works together. Give them knowledge. Change what someone knows by writing for them. And finally, instruct someone. Have you heard that saying, give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day, teach a man to fish, he'll eat for the rest of his life? If I tell you about my delicious breakfast, that's kind of cruel unless I also instruct you on how to make it yourself. If you've made a great library and you've told someone how much you love it, you've given them all the information about it, but you don't tell them how to use it, what good is that? What good is an idea that you have, that you love, that you've inspired other people with, that you've described to other people that nobody can use? Instructing is the third part. It's the essential part. We need all three of these tools. And I want you all, at some point soon, to go out and use them. Talk to someone. Tell someone about something you did. Write something down. Maybe you write for yourself in a journal. That's fine. It's all good practice. Write it down. Describe it in writing. And instruct someone. How can they do it as well? How can they benefit from what you've done? Stories are the way that we communicate. They're the way we've always communicated. Dreams are stories. Dream big. Try to change the world. Do it with stories. Thank you. Questions?
Yes.
Yes, I can't see where you are, so I can't look at you unless you wave.
Yes.
There, yes.
Hello.
Hello.
Would you please provide some rules or principle, some example of such rule or principle you just described? For example, would you when you were invited to be the keynote speaker in Python conference here, What do you think?
What did I think? So, the questions to go through that I went through for that. Who is my audience? I assume you're all Python developers. You've used Python at some point. You know Python. You know coding somewhere from very little, maybe to a lot. I'm sure there's some absolute experts in the room. There's definitely some people who have just started learning Python in the room. So I know that you've got such a broad knowledge of coding. You've made it to a conference. That means that you either work somewhere that sent you, you're at school somewhere that sent you, or you have enough money to get here, which I assume means that you all have a background, you have education to whatever extent you're up to, or you're completed. I've already met a number of PhDs here, PhD students, a very broad range of educational background. Deciding my intent, so I knew I had to speak. I knew I was speaking. I couldn't just get up here and provide information. I couldn't get up here and say this, 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 and this. So I looked at what I could do. I looked at what I was capable of. It's free choice. Free choice for a keynote is an interesting place to be. Some people get really well known for certain topics, and it's easy for them. I'm not well known for any particular topic, so I picked something new that I am passionate about sharing, and I think you saw that, right? So I really wanted to share planning how to do communication well, convincing you that it's important, giving you guidance, instructions on how to do that, the first steps. And here I am. Thank you. Oh, more?
I am convinced.
Excellent.
Questions? Question?
Is that one up there?
Hi, Steve. I'm Candy.
Hi, Candy.
And I just joined the lightning talk in in 20 more minutes, and I would really want to ask that you said speaking is really important, but the main point is when you speak to a large audience, you get really nervous, and I don't know how to cope with that.
Everyone has different ways of coping with it. The way that I've seen most people succeed with getting over nervousness is simply to keep doing it. The first time you're nervous. Second time you're less nervous. Third time you're even less nervous. Eventually, by the 200th or 300th time, you're only a big bit nervous instead of a huge bit nervous. And one day, you're eventually not nervous at all, and I think that's about 50 years after you've died, because everyone's always nervous when they get up to speak. I was nervous. I was walking around nervous backstage. Everyone's always nervous. But the thing is, when everyone is there to listen to you, that's what they're there for. You don't have to be nervous that people are rejecting you, that people are not listening to you, because they came here to listen. Everyone who's in the lightning talks later is listening to you, and at the end, they're all going to clap for you. No matter how you do, everyone is going to clap for you, because we're all nervous when we speak, and we all know that, and we all love it when someone gets up and speaks. Half of us, because we know that feeling, we know how much anguish they're feeling, and we're proud of them. The other half, because they're feeling it as well. They're like, I could never do that. This is so scary, and I'm not even the one speaking. And they'll clap as well, because they're impressed. So one day, you'll get less nervous once you've done enough speaking. But until then, everyone's nervous. Yes.
Well, basically, I have the same question that just when you, I sometimes feel like I talk to the computers for so long that I almost forget how to talk to people normally. Yeah, and so, like right now, I'm really nervous to ask the questions. And do you have some practical guidelines to overcome the fear? Like, do you still remember the first time you're on the stage talking to the huge audience? Yeah, can you share some experience with us? Thank you.
So the first time I spoke to a really big audience, it was about 5,000 people, and I was 16 years old, and still at school. We had this big concert with everyone's families and parents were there, and I had to get up and introduce one of the bands. So, and this was big. I mean, this is a small room by comparison. This was like 5,000, 6,000 people were there. And I had to go and stand up and say some things about the music, about the band, and so I had it written down, and I read it out. Because I was nervous, and I didn't want to forget. But in writing it down, I learned it, because that's how we learn, and I revised it and I worked on it so that I was very familiar with it. By the time I actually got up to read it, I knew it. And that's the biggest way to beat nervousness, is to learn the very start of your talk. James Whitaker, who was up at the start, is one of my mentors, always says that the first 30 seconds is so important you need to memorize it. And when that's memorized, and you practice it. And I know plenty of people that will practice while they're driving their car. They'll pull up to the lights and wind down the window, turn to the person in the car next to them, and just present the first line of their presentation. And if you can do that, if you can present it to some random person who just happened to stop at the same stoplight, when you get up in front of a friendly audience, it's much easier to do. But certainly memorize the start of your talk, is so that when you get up and you get started, because once you start, it's easy to keep going. It's always the first part where you get up and it's like, the lights, the people, I don't know what to say. So memorize it. Even start with your eyes closed. I've done that before. I've come out and it was like, I don't remember what the line was, but it's casual walk across the stage. The first time we did this, it was a disaster. And now I've opened my eyes and I'm already going, so it's too late to be scared, because I've already started talking. So memorize the first line at least, and just be confident to start it, and everything else will fall into place from there. Is that one up there?
You said like before you communicate, you always have an intent, but like, do you do that in your daily life, like when you talk to your friends?
Not very deeply. So when I talk to friends, if I have to plan a conversation, yeah, I'll think about it. If I'm just chatting about nothing, there's no real intent. But if I have a story, then I'll think about it as a story. Because if I'm going to tell something, no matter who your audience is, no matter how well they know you, they're going to enjoy a story as well. People like people with stories. So if you could tell someone some piece of information, or if you can give them a story, they're going to enjoy that as well. They're going to enjoy you speaking to you because you have stories, because you're interesting. But most of the time, I don't work deeply through the questions, not like I did for this. This is a big event. This is a big opportunity. And I want to make sure that I'm very intentional with everything that I do from this stage. If I'm sending an email to someone at work, I'll briefly think about it. What do I need from them? Do I need to ask them something? Do I need to discuss something with them? Do I need to persuade them of something? Do I need to tell them something? And that is a very quick way that generally gets me to, do we have a meeting or do I send an email? So as much as there is a decision to make, I'll always think it through. But a lot of the time, there's no choice. I'm going to be speaking. It's a friend who wants to know what I had for breakfast because I have some weird friends. And so I'm going to tell them a story. Yep.
Hi, Steve. I want to know if you give the people a story, but if they don't buy it, how do you change their mind? How do you instruct them?
Oh, if they don't buy the story. I mean, yeah, it happens. It happens, and sometimes you get caught out lying about the story, if that's what you've done. I don't recommend lying about stories. Though certainly there's value in telling it dramatically, more value in telling it dramatically than if it was a boring story, because that would be a boring story. But if someone doesn't buy the story, you just have to keep trying. If you need to convince them, then you need another story. But if you're trying to convince people, they need to be in the story. That's one of the big important things. If you're trying to tell someone about something, it's either got to be a really good story about you or a story about them. It doesn't have to be really good, but a story about the person you're convincing, the people you're convincing, is far more persuasive than a story about you. Yep.
I want to ask, how do you prepare your presentation effectively? Do you use a camera or ask your friends to do you a favor? Thanks.
So that's, I tend to use a mirror mostly, but that very much varies by person. So if you have friends that are willing to listen to your talks and want to hear them in advance, great opportunity to use. Friendly audience is always good. If you're going somewhere else to give a presentation, it's always really good to get someone you know to sit in the front row so that every time you get nervous, you can look and see someone that you know, see a friendly face, and that will encourage you. But I tend to prepare on my own. I tend to use a mirror or while I'm traveling somewhere, rather than recording. I can't stand watching myself. I'm never going to watch the video of this session because I can't do it. But some people get a lot out of recording themselves and watching it back. And certainly if you think that you do a lot of weird things with your hands, then it's worth watching a video. Even if you don't think you do weird things with your hands, you probably do. So watch the video, you'll see the things that you don't like, and you'll stop doing them. But generally, I just prepare on my own. I don't use a lot of other people or other feedback while I'm preparing a talk. That said, I've been doing it for a lot of years. And when you're getting started, I would definitely recommend getting trusted friends or mentors to give you feedback as you develop a talk. That up the back.
Just a simple follow-up of the previous question. Do you actually do you watch your actual the recording of your actual talks?
Generally not. It's embarrassing.
Yeah, I get that.
I think my voice sounds funny, so I don't like listening to it. No, it's not that bad, but oh, he's agreeing with me. Youngyu's agreeing with me. My voice sounds funny, so. Yep.
Hi, Steve. You just told us if you don't want to change your audience, just don't communication. So could you condense your subject and give us one little thing we can apply in our daily life to change our communication?
I believe what I said for that is if there's nothing to change, you don't need to communicate. And that's really a warning against excess email or against excess instant messaging, against excess meetings. If you want to meet up, if you want to have a meeting at work and you don't have anything to change for people, that's a waste of time. And especially if you like meetings and you're calling in all your engineers, they don't like meetings. So you are changing something in that case. You're making your engineers upset with you, which is probably not the change you wanted to have. So if you go through everything that you might want to achieve and there's nothing you actually want to do, don't communicate. Just don't do it. If you need to inform, that's something to achieve, that's something to change. But if you don't even have that, don't call a meeting, don't start a phone call, don't waste an email, because we don't need that. Intentional communication means every communication is effective. And if you're going to send an ineffective communication, that's not being intentional, that's being annoying or disruptive or just impolite. Yes?
Hi, Steve. I want to ask a question. When you are preparing a presentation and when you read is the audience is interested in the topic and when they feel too difficult or too easy and when you change your story. Thank you.
So if I'm unsure about the level of the audience, as far as background knowledge or background experiences, one thing that I'll try and be very clear about early on is what level I'm working at. So in an audience like this, so I know that the entire conference is here right now. But if I had a talk that was up against two others, and I was going to do something advanced, I would say this is an advanced talk in the description. So everyone's reading it goes, oh, I'm advanced, or I'm not advanced. Or hopefully, they look and go, I would like to be advanced. I'll go along and see how I do. And then ask questions until I understand it, and then I'll be advanced. So I'm very clear about it up front. You'll see in some of my talks, some of my videos, one of the first things I'll say is, this is what I assume you know, or this is who you are. I assume you already know about this, and you know about this, and I'm going to talk about this. And that at least gives people a chance very early on to either leave, or at least to go, I know that he's telling me stuff that I don't understand. And he said that because otherwise people can go the entire way through a session feeling stupid. Because they sit there going, should I understand this? I think I should understand. Am I meant to understand? Am I just stupid? And at least if you say early on, this is an introductory talk on this. This is a talk for people, a couple of years of experience. This is a talk for people who've worked on big, big projects. You already have experience with this. You've used Django. You've used Mongo. And I'm going to talk about this. And it sets the level early on so that people know what's coming up. They will understand, if they don't understand everything, that you're not expecting them to. And so they won't feel as stupid. Or they can just leave and go to another talk.
I think we are taking the last question. Yeah.
Yep.
Hello. Thanks, Steve. You said everything I wanted to say to my boss. So I'm going to quote you on this.
Please do. Please do.
That's a quick one, so maybe we can take another one.
We'll take one more.
One more?
Yep.
Hello, it's an amazing talk. Maybe I want to ask, may you share some story? Maybe you change your company or change something in your life, a real story?
Sure. So the way that I got hired by Microsoft is actually a really interesting story. Before I started working at Microsoft, I was at grad school. I was doing a PhD. I just started, and my supervisor had given me all of his old code and said, this is a Python library that'll be really useful for what you're trying to do. So he's given me this big pile of Python code. I didn't know Python at this point. I'd used it a little bit, but I didn't really know it. So I'd start with this big pile of code to work from. And straight away, I found myself wanting Visual Studio support. So I'd been using Visual Studio for years, C#, C++, and now I had Python code, and I wanted to work on it, and I wanted it in Visual Studio. So I started writing it. I started writing an extension to make Visual Studio support Python. I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool, and publish the basics, and let other people download and install it. And then I see a tweet one day from this guy at Microsoft saying, oh, Microsoft is making Python support in Visual Studio. This is about 6 years ago now. And I just went, you're destroying another open source project. But it turned out that one was open source as well. And it was better than mine because the team that was writing it was better at programming than I was at that point. Well, I mean, now I'm on the team, so they're as good as I am. But at that point, they were better than me. I brought them down a bit. And so I switched to theirs. And so I stopped working on mine. And as soon as they published theirs, I downloaded it and started using it and broke it. And so I filed a bug. And then I broke it again. And filed another bug, broke it again, filed another bug. And I did that 70 times within about 4 or 5 days. I found out later that that was the same week that their tester went on holiday. So the main tester wasn't there, and this random guy on the internet was filing all of these bugs. So they emailed me and said, hey, we fixed some bugs. Do you want a new version so you can test it, see if it's fixed? And I emailed back and said, sure, I'll grab it, and downloaded it, built it, tried it all, and said, yeah, they're all fixed, good job. And then the next email said, how would you like to come be an intern? My manager is a little bit, he's a very interesting person. He's a very interesting person. When he emailed that email to me, he used a Hotmail address that didn't have his full name on it. So I got an email from s@hotmail.com saying, how would you like to be a Microsoft intern? I thought it was spam at first. I genuinely did. I mean, it wasn't even a capital S. It was a lowercase s. It's like, this is meant to be your name. And so eventually, I came around and said, sure, why not? The worst that can happen is he says, transfer $100 million to this bank account, and I just don't have to do that, right? I can stop before that point. So I said, sure, what do we do next? And then he passed me on to HR, and so that all went through properly at that point. But I was genuinely hired into Microsoft contributing to one of their open source projects, which is Visual Studio support for Python, which is now the project that I'm leading at Microsoft. It's the one that I work on. And if anyone else is interested in coming to work at Microsoft on that project, great way to get started. It's still open source. It's on GitHub, as are most of our projects. Feel free to contribute. We will watch, we will notice, and if you're making good contributions, you might get an email from s@hotmail.com asking if you want to come be an intern. I think we're out of time now, so thank you very much. Thanks for being a great audience. Enjoy the lightning talks.